what are you going to do about it? You're going to stay at the edge of the water. You're going to jump in and just face it and go all in on like your own freedom? Or are you going to stand by the edge of the water and cower in fear? Are you going to commit to the highest version of yourself? And if so, you have to be willing to let go of old belief systems, of old stories, of old skill sets that don't serve you for the next season.
Well, guys, today I am introducing you to an incredible superhero in my eyes. His name is Nick Cavuoto, and he is a consultant to enormous businesses, a big business consultant for the most influential brands. He's worked with companies like Verizon and Microsoft and Paychex, and he has been increasing the revenue of these companies exponentially, and he's just such a wealth of information. What he's joining us here today to talk about is how to tuck into your own success and those key concepts as an entrepreneur that are so important into identifying what is unique to you, valuing that uniqueness, and then doubling down on it. You know, Nick has been so inspirational to me over the past few years. I've been following him and his journey in his businesses as well. He's the king of pivoting, which has been so important in the past few years with COVID. But he also marries beautifully this idea of a spiritual connection and an intuition as an entrepreneur, and then a very linear-minded, strategy-oriented, business-minded acumen. He really does it so beautifully, and he's going to introduce some of those concepts to us here today. Something else that I loved in this interview, he gives us his 4 C's of enormous success as an entrepreneur, and I know you're going to relate to these. He also shared with us a story of his childhood, which was extremely impactful to me, and I'm sure will be inspirational to you, not only seeing yourself in a situation similar to that, but also just seeing the learning and the growth that Nick took from a potentially damaging experience in his childhood and how he turned it into a superpower. He's just so inspirational. I know you're going to love this episode. Join me in welcoming the one and only Nick Cavuoto. Hello, and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today we have with us an exceptional human being. He is a serial entrepreneur reinventing himself every day, a speaker and a guide for so many big companies and leaders to help them transform their businesses. He is a wealth of information, but really just an incredible human being. Welcome today, Mr. Nick Cavuoto. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Dr. Tarryn. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much. I'm pumped.
I'm so good. I'm so excited to share your insight with my audience because I think there might be many listeners on this platform who haven't yet learned of your expertise, and I can't wait for you to share it with us. But I want you to just start out telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey of happiness in business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I'm self-prescribed as a maverick. These used to be called disruptors in business. I believe mavericks are just rare breeds, people who know they're different. A little background on me. I am borderline on spectrum, ADD, ADHD. In addition, I found myself, you know, being a pretty tough student and in the world of academia. Yet at the same time, I still felt like I was gifted. And it wasn't until I found out this mixture of ADD, ADHD, which I believe is a superpower of my ability to focus only on things that I love doing and to go all in on those. In addition to being an HSP and a high empath, I combined those two things in order to identify what those superpowers were. I figured out later in life that I was really great at marketing because I understand people and I can feel the emotion of what people feel. And I've also learned how to accept that and also how to drop it when I don't need to hold on to it. So I've spent a lot of time in the personal development and mental health space for myself of just learning and having the right doctors and therapists and counselors around me to help me become the best version of myself. And I think that's required because entrepreneurship, as beautiful as it is, we take a punishing beating when it comes to trying to figure out our next big idea, our next role. There's an identity process that's to attach to it. And just most people don't talk about it. And I think that I'm a bit of a leading voice in saying, it's okay if you're different. It's okay if you're 3% of the population, which I find myself in. because we're different, and that's totally fine. And there's a huge opportunity on the opposite side of that once you can identify what those beautiful things are about you as an individual and how you can make your greatest contribution in the world. So for me, I've doubled down on the things that I've known that I've been really successful at. I've dropped some of the ideas around things that maybe haven't served me. Maybe there was someone else's dream, someone else's idea about who I should be or how I should show up in the world. And I've just made a commitment to go all in on what I feel like God is, leading me into. And I have a relentless pursuit of that. There's no question. So yeah, that's the evolution. That's the innovation. That's the constantly figuring out oneself that allows us to then, I believe, do our greatest work.
And a big part of that you talk about is belief in self. Tell us
Mhm.
a little bit about your journey of why you've come to think of that as one of the most important aspects of successful entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Well, in studying the book Flow, which is basically the science behind optimal performance, it shows this chart and this graph that I think is really good. And you can Google it for anybody who wants to see what this chart is. But it's this flow chart that shows how you can say an optimal performance. It requires two things. It requires a high challenge in life and or in business. And I don't know about you guys, but I think we have plenty of challenges right now. So it's pretty easy to stay in that high challenge. And especially if you're an entrepreneur, spurring yourself on and trying to find happiness within your work. I think there's this idea of like having something that's you want to sink your teeth into, something you really, really are excited about that you want to overcome or achieve. And so that's where we find our challenge. And then the other side is your skill set. The Bishop, T.D. Jakes, said, be careful to never outstep your competence. And I think that's a really, really, really good word of advice for people to just know what you're the best at. Sometimes if we step just one spot outside of our zone of genius, we will doubt ourselves and our ability. So the skill set and the challenge, when those meet, that's like Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. Okay. Yeah. High challenge and also high skill because he's prepared for that moment his whole life. And I think a lot of us operate the same way. Now there's a 3D layer that most people don't talk about, which is belief. Now I could be in a spot of where I have a high caliber of skill. I have incredible challenge. Maybe Tom Brady in the Super Bowl in 2017, he was down 3-28 in fourth quarter. How are we going to win this game? And you could see the faces of other people, like his teammates, feeling like this is over, like we're never going to come back. But Tom believes something different than most people, and that's that they could actually still win. So when you have the combination of skill, high talent, in addition to having a big challenge, an audacious goal, something you want to achieve. So as long as you believe that it's possible, it's like affirmations are not true unless you believe them, then you actually can succeed in that. So I think most people find themselves bored and apathetic in life and business or underperforming because they don't actually believe in the thing that they truly want to do, or the success ratio of what that looks like, they're playing too small. And so I'm always pushing on people to go big or go home.
I love that. I love that trilogy that you just identified, because I think you're right. Sometimes success is actually hurting you because you get too comfortable in it. And so you don't give yourself that next challenge. You don't give yourself an opportunity for that hunger. I think that's such an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't considered that before. I was thinking as you were speaking about so many of my colleagues who have learned a great skill set. They've, studied for decades, poured so much of their life into learning a skill set in the medical or the dental world, and they wake up unhappy, they wake up miserable. And some of that might be, as you just mentioned, not looking for a new challenge, a new hunger, a new need.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And a lot of times our lifestyle as entrepreneurs gets to a certain level, and then we feel like we got to keep up with the lifestyle we have. Kids in private schools, cars you drive, neighborhood you live in, whatever. So to make a pivot, you got to literally start over. I'm like king of the pivot. I think there's two things that happen in entrepreneurship. Changes. So things change, right? And it's just an event that happens like COVID. That was an event that it happened instantly. Or you have transition, which is a skill. You have to learn how to go from point A to point B. And there's a transitional skill and time period of understanding, how do I get there and how do I do it the right way? So I've dealt with both. I've dealt with, being in, Fortune 500 as a marketer and as a product development leader. And I've learned how to, transition into building multiple companies, doing multiple 7 figures. And then I've lost those due to, change. COVID happens. I was working with, elective practitioners and lost the ability to work with them. And instantly and overnight, in 48 hours, I lost $1 million worth of revenue for the year. What do you do at that point? You have to know how to reinvent and to do something different. And I think those experiences for me uniquely have given me the opportunity to actually make the choice of myself over and over and over again. Because when you're literally, Les Brown says, if you're on your back, the good news is you can look up.
I like that.
Right. So you got to just allow yourself, like when you get knocked down, as long as you can look up, then you have the ability to get up. And if you can get up, you might as well just do what the hell you want, because I think most people just are not selecting that pattern for themselves. So, I think that all of the experiences that have happened in my life, and certainly with those around me, I think they're intentional. The question is, are you going to commit to the highest version of yourself? And if so, you have to be willing to let go of old belief systems, of old stories, of old skill sets that don't serve you for the next season.
That may have been serving you in the past.
Oh, likely were. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Me as a marketer, being a really good marketer served me well. I did $200 million worth of revenue for other people. That's great. They're super happy about that, but it doesn't serve me in this stage of my life. And I asked one of my mentors, Vernice Armour, who's also a client. She's incredible. And I said, what do you feel like you see for me in this next season of life? I'm just curious of your perspective. And I said, because I feel like I'm in the pocket. So like I'm in this pocket, but like I like being uncomfortable. I like having the odds stacked against me, And she's like, well, what did my friend Tony do? And she's talking about Tony Robbins. And she said, what did he do when he started early on in his career and then got him to where he got today? And she said, do you think he evolved inside the pocket or out of the pocket? And I said, he evolved inside the pocket. So it's this mashup of the uniqueness of who you are, where that is almost like now look at the tornado as like a circular ring the pocket as a circular ring of a tornado. I want to be right in the middle of the calm of the storm, but I understand the velocity of what's going on around me is going to continue increasing at a higher rate. That's my pocket. It's a tornado, and I'm okay with that.
Wow, that is really powerful. And I have to say, a really unique perspective, because I think people get so terrified of that tornado that they don't even want to go near it. They want to just stay in the safety of the pocket. So yes, you have exemplified the pivot over and over and over again in your entrepreneurial journey. But what do you say to people who are so scared to do so? In other words, maybe they've for decades been finding a certain modicum of success, but now it's apparent something has to change. But that pivot feels so terrifying and fearful. There's a lot of strength to be gained from having been laid on your back and gotten back up again. You have evidence that you can do it again, and once you realize that, you can be courageous for it. But what about those entrepreneurs who haven't had that yet and know now that there needs to be a big change?
It's a great question. Well, I'm just going to say what I feel about this in radical honesty. I would tell them as quickly as possible to blow their life up. If you want to do something great, you are choosing the path of what I believe is your highest calling and destiny. And in order to do so, you have to be wildly uncomfortable. You cannot find a sense of comfort if you're truly living out your calling. Bottom line, because God has, in my opinion, so positioned it that there's a reliance. Just because you're weary does not mean that you are weak. If you're finding yourself where you're like, I'm tired, but I'm trying, that's a great place to be, because there's still effort happening. But at some point, you have to burn the boats. You have to make a conscious decision in order to release what you have currently to do something better. And I understand their senses of responsibility. Listen, I have 4 kids. I totally get it. I live in an affluent area in Denver. My kids go to private school. When those things happen, you will find a way, but that's the true way of an entrepreneur, is to figure it out. And I think that there's a contention happening within our calling, where if we know that we need to do something different and we don't, that's where, calamities come in and challenges come in, because it's like we are being rather disobedient to our highest self, yet that's what we want. So it's like this weird dichotomy of like, I want something new, different, and audacious, yet I'm not comfortable enough to do it. So your intention will push you outside of your comfort zone, even if your intention on the other side is to be safe. Safe is the new risky. I promise you. I had a safe, working with elective practitioners, live events business, and that went like this overnight. We all see it now. So I think there's like these 4 transitional stages to get to your calling. Number 1, you got to be clear on what you want. Most people are not clear on what they want. They're clear about what they don't want. I don't give a crap about what you don't want. I want to know what you do want. And that comes from a lot of conditioning. Since I've been in over 30 therapy sessions in the last like 4 months, it comes from a lot of conditioning as kids where our needs are not met. And dual household families that are working, right? All these other things that a lot of us were raised in, our needs were not paramount and protected. They were something that were secondary. So we have learned to adapt in those environments. And that serves us till we're about 20 years old. So, but after 20, being a people pleaser doesn't work out so great. Being a high empath and carrying around everybody else's energy and trying to protect their energy doesn't work. You need to become self-focused. So I'm not saying to be selfish and just screw everybody else. I'm going to do what I want. You need to be obsessed with becoming self-focused on exactly what you want. And I do an exercise with people where I'll have them stand in front of me for 7 minutes and I'll ask them the same question over and over and over again. And I have 2 rules. Rule number 1, you cannot say, I don't know. And rule number 2, you can't repeat the same thing twice. And I ask them over and over and over and over again what they want. And usually by minute 2, they crack and they're in tears. Some of them like in the fetal position on the floor because they've never contended for their call. They've never truly gotten underneath the surface of what they want. And there's also a harsh reality when you do that of seeing, holy crap, I'm not even anywhere close to what that is. Well, if you're saying you want to go from Austin, Texas to San Francisco and you end up, in Maine, that's where most people are in life. They were 1 degree off and that kept continuing. And all of a sudden they're somewhere they don't even want to be. Let's just do the freaking rescue mission and get you out of there. But the first thing is you got to be clear about what you want.
Wow. That's crazy. I mean, it's crazy and so true. And it's courageous. One of the things that I think you do so well when you speak, by the way, is you blend this idea of spiritual integrity and business acumen so beautifully. And I know your history before you got into business. You were in the speaking world on stage in churches. Am I right? Were you ministering at the time?
Yeah, I was a pastor for 7 years. Yep.
You were a pastor for 7 years before you went into business. And you do that so beautifully. And I think that sometimes there's a discomfort for people. Either they're very linear minded and they're sticking to that business acumen, or they're so spiritual, they find it very difficult to bring some of those linear minded tasks and action items into their day to day. How do you do that? How do you blend those two so beautifully, as you just did for us right now, and explaining on how to find what you want and find your purpose? If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know.
I just don't judge myself. When I was in ministry, we grew a church from 1,000 to 10,000 people every weekend in 5 of those 7 years. I was number 2 in the organization. I built 5 different locations as part of that expression. I never spoke on the stage through the context of a message. I would do like a welcome, or I would do like announcements, things like that. But I never got asked to speak one time. So the interesting thing is that I found myself in the old building of where the church started, late nights, listening to a message in one ear and dictating out of my mouth in the other, because I felt like I wasn't good enough. I didn't know why I wasn't being asked to contribute when I had a heart to contribute. And 2 things I found out later in life. One, that was preparation for me in a season of like having this grittiness to just like never give up. which is attached to a different story in my life, but it manifested really uniquely at that time. And the second thing was that if I can impact one person 100%, I would rather do that than 100 people 1%, because I was impacting myself in that moment of finding the pathway and of actually now getting in the reps, but also like hearing these messages that were really powerful. But I just felt like I wasn't clear enough. I wasn't compelling enough to actually speak. And I figured out it's a broken story. That's not real. I just was so good at building. I was so good at taking the pressure off of the main dude so he could do that I found myself behind the scenes. And that's great. Once I had that realization, it's like everything dropped, like the frustration and the feelings of not being good enough. And then, my dad just, I grew up in a really foundational, like Christian home, but my dad was a drug dealer who found Jesus. So like, it's like raw Jesus, like savage stuff, like this is not this angle of like pie in the sky and, make sure that you do all your rituals and all this stuff. It's like real life transformation stuff. And my dad just said to me one day, he said, "You're an oracle for God. Just open your mouth." Sometimes we need to hinge on someone else's belief in us more than our own in seasons of transition. And I'm grateful that through most of life's seasons of trial that my father has done that for me. I would hope that someone has someone doing that for them. And if they don't, then I would love to be that voice of belief and confidence for them. I can't do the work for you, but I certainly can tell you that it's possible.
That is really cool. That was really cool. You do so beautifully. And I just want to take this moment to honor you and say thank you, because at least from my perspective, you do so for so many people, even though you might not hear those stories. And in that, to that point, you've done so for me as well, in terms of inspiring me to tuck into my belief for myself, and also that uniqueness that you speak to, that each of us is such a unique person, and that within that uniqueness is the superpower that the world is waiting for. And having that, sharing that is so powerful. So I appreciate it. And I thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for that reflection. It means a lot.
What do you think is the superpower that entrepreneurs need to find in themselves to face and to be successful in this new world? I'm not going to say post-COVID, because I don't know that this will ever end, but post the inception of COVID, what do you think entrepreneurs need to be really good at going forward?
Yeah, it's part of those 4 C's I was talking about earlier. So the first one is clarity. The second one is confidence. You have to be confident. And, this is where, for me, the spiritual part is activated in a really beautiful way, because I know where my help comes from. It's not all here. I have a lot of grit, more than most people. And that's attached to a near-death experience when I was 5. But that's because I had to fight for my life so young, literally fight for my life to stay alive. That's why I'm not fazed by the transitions in life that most people are. And so it's a unique expression that I'm aware of that I want to share with people, because maybe they've had a challenging moment when they were young, or even maybe later in life, of where they've had to really, when you find your physiology kick into a survival mechanism, survival mode for self-preservation to stay alive, it's a whole different experience than just like, putting in the good fight. It's very different. So, so the confidence that you can do it, for me, comes from a wound, and it also comes from a win. The wound is where I found, trauma in my life. The win is from knowing that God, said many are called, but few are chosen. I believe that God has a calling for everybody, and he taps us on the shoulder and says, "Here, I have something great for you to accomplish in the world." But it's our choice to choose it. That's where I think most people get it wrong. It's like they think that God is now called, and then he hand selects and chooses people. That's not true. God gives everyone a unique divine destiny and reason to be here on the earth. The problem is we're waiting for him to pick us. And the reality is he already did. It's time for you to pick you. Again, confidence comes in that frame of knowing that God has got your back. It's what's kept me running all these years. When you have the clarity and the confidence.
Tell us before you go on, by the way, because I have to know, what happened when you were 5?
We Saturday afternoon, we went out to a state park, and we went to a pool, and my parents were, getting us all in or whatever. And myself and my two brothers, and we were playing around the pool and whatever. And there was a gal with special needs who jumped on my back. She was about 15, 16 years old, and submerged me underwater for almost 3 minutes up and down. I was basically waterboarded as a 5-year-old. And without anyone rescuing or coming to save the moment, my dad did finally see it happening and jumped in the pool and got me out. And I was petrified of water for basically until I was 12. And I just remember, like, we would play in pools as kids, and like, we'd be like with our friends' dads, and they'd like grab my head and try to like push me under playing around. And I would like go like it full blown panic. Yeah. And at 12 years old, my grandmother brought me to she had a campground that they went to every weekend, and she brought me to the pool at the campground. And at that time, my grandmother was probably in her late 70s, and she used to knit like hats and gloves for kids. And she would give them to like the Salvation Army and stuff. And so she brought me to this pool. She sat down with her wicker chair, the ones that were like green and like tan, like you remember these green and orange from like, the early 90s.
Oh yeah. I can picture it.
Yeah. So she sat me down, and, she put her chair down and sat with me and said, I want you to get in the pool and swim. And I was like, yeah, but Grandma, you know the story. My grandmother was a war bride from World War II. She married my grandfather in England, and they moved here thereafter. And you could imagine what she went through with her grandmother, who was paralyzed. She had to bring her from building to building, literally by hand, carrying her during immense trial. And she had a thing for perseverance because she knew what it was like to have to push through something huge. And so she basically transitioned that belief of perseverance and persistence into me. And I remember standing at the edge of the water, and I look over at her kind of like, okay, so she probably can save me if I can't swim. I'm measuring the reality of how deep the water is, and she's just sitting there knitting like it's not even a big deal. Just freaking get in there. And at that moment, I had a decision to either face my greatest fear and to overcome it, or to cower and just sit there all day. It did feel like she was like, I'm not going anywhere until you do this. So I just stood at the edge of the water and waited and waited and waited. And then I just said, all right, well, I don't really have a choice. So I just got to jump in. And I did. And then I was in the pool for like 2 hours, and I overcame my greatest fear.
Wow.
I think that's what we have to do in life sometimes. We all have a really hard story. There's some experience. I think life is a trauma experience in a lot of ways. There's a lot of crap that we've all been through. But the reality is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to stand at the edge of the water? Are you going to jump in and just face it and go all in on like your own freedom? Or are you going to stand by the edge of the water and cower in fear? Because there's only two options. You can't do both. And a lot of times, again, we need someone standing with us. And for me, that was my grandmother. My father, ended up helping get me out of the water the first time. My grandmother helped me get in the water the second time. So
that's an incredible story. I appreciate you sharing it with us.
Thank you.
I think that many people can identify with it, not necessarily having had that same story, but maybe finding themselves on that edge of the pool now, not doing what they've always wished they could do, or cowering away from something that they believe is too fearful to face.
Totally.
So we got to you before I so rudely interrupted you. We got to clarity and then confidence. Share with us those last two C's, please.
Conviction and calling. You cannot be convicted about what you want to accomplish in the world if you're not clear and you're not confident. It's impossible to find conviction. Conviction is that deep-seated motivator that always turns, that keeps you up at night in order to do your greatest work. You're convicted about it. You believe in it so much that you can identify what the common enemy is. And yet at the same time, you can identify the reward in which is reaped by actually pursuing this thing, that whatever it is that you want to do. And without conviction, I believe that you'll never find your calling, because it does take a level of like physiological shifting where you can feel it in your gut that you've got to do it. There's been so many moments in my life I felt in my gut, I just got to do this. I don't care how uncomfortable it is. I really don't care who it affects. I am obsessed with the idea that I have to be in right standing with what I'm supposed to do in life. Otherwise, the whole equation is broken. I'm living someone else's dream, someone else's plan, someone else's reality, someone else's expectations. That's a sure way to hate your life and your business. Not to find happiness, but to find like dismal reality. So I think if you're clear, if you're confident, if you're convicted, and you know it in your gut and you can feel that burning in your gut, you can actually find your calling. At what point the question is this, at what point are you stopping? Are you unclear so you give up? Well, if so, you're screwed. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Be obsessed with finding clarity. Hire whatever coach you need to find the clarity that you need. Someone who you feel like can see you, validate you, can help you, can hear you, and what it is that you want to accomplish. And when you have clarity, which is such an unbelievable tool, then you can start finding confidence, and or what I like to measure with that for those who are listening who are maybe more hard skill based is competence. You have competence in something. I thought I was great at marketing because I had tangible evidence where I could prove and say, I did this for this company. It's not true. My confidence lied in the fact that I understood humanity and how people operate. So yes, marketing was good. But go deeper and go like, how do I go in through this portal and out the other side? People who are great at marketing are because they understand the human condition. So now all of a sudden, when I saw the human condition as the thing that really was my superpower, then I was like, well, I can do whatever I want. No wonder I was a great pastor. No wonder I was a great contributor in certain ways. No wonder I was a great, communicator when it came to boardrooms and all this other stuff and being a persuader. No wonder I was so good at marketing and branding and messaging because I understood people. So now all of a sudden my world just opened and I can go like, what am I convicted to do? And I'm like, I hate lost potential. And I know that word is a low frequency word. I use it on purpose because there's a part of me that just, it's primal. Like I cannot stand the idea of lost potential in people. I can't. I cannot go to my grave and or meet my future self on the day of my death and go like, what would you have done had you had the confidence, the audacious assurance, if you had something deep within your heart burning where you had conviction to go do your greatest work? What would my life have looked like different? I want to meet that version of me one day and go like, you just didn't actually go pursue what you felt like you were supposed to do. No, I can't do it. I can't do it.
Wow.
That's conviction, right?
That is.
So that's how I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, even though I'm not necessarily where, if I painted the perfect picture, it'd be exactly where I'd want to be. I don't know if that's ever attainable. But as long as there's a tension line to doing it, then for me, I'm like, I'll play out that much harder.
Wow. Oh, that's so awesome. Nick, you make me just want to go out there and accomplish enormously incredible things. You're so
run through a wall,
inspirational.
right?
I love it. I love it. I love it. Live way outside our comfort zones.
Mm.
You know, I think there are going to be so many people that I would love to learn more about you, and we'll put all the links to how to find you online in the show notes of this episode. But for those business owners of big, larger companies who really would like to incorporate this, because I think that that's going to be one of the most important aspects of business, at least in the medical and dental world, is being able to pivot as a large company. It's one of our greatest strengths as small businesses, is we can do that pivot so easily. Not so easy for big companies. And that's something that you do and support. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, companies of different scale, doesn't matter if I'm working with a Fortune 500 brand or I'm helping, high performing entrepreneur seek out what it is they want to achieve and helping them go get it. I think the brass tacks is this. When people know that there's a time for change, it requires help to think different, see different, do different. And that's where I come in, classically known as a disruptor, in a corporate space. I believe it's all about being a rare breed. It takes unique perspective. It takes unique objectivity around a challenge in order to see how to solve the problem different. And the greatest analogy of this is Dr. House. If you guys remember that show House,
Yes.
where he would like, this complicated problem would come to him that no one else could figure out. And he was obsessed with getting to the logical facts, but at the same time, he mixed the logical and the magical somehow together. And in a classic disruptive way. For me, I have a lot more kind candor because I love people in a different capacity, I think, than Dr. House did. But the end of the day is like, that's what it takes sometimes, is like this this unique ability to get to that end result. And that's what I'm entrusted to do. Is it's like a commanding officer in the military. You have your general commander who's got the big war plan, but the commanding officer who helps actually now make that happen. And that's where I come in on implementation, leading, delegating, whatever is required to hit the objective. They call the bat phone. They're like, Nick, no one else can solve this. I need you to do it. That's my specialty, and I can do it for people and for companies. So, yeah.
And you bring into it this beautiful marriage of intuition and intellectual capacity. It's a really beautiful thing to watch.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I think that I've learned from the Elon Musks and the Steve Jobs of the world, that was their personality type as well. They were marrying these big ideas with very practical things, and that's where all the magic happens.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today and sharing some of your insight. And I'm just so grateful to you for everything that you do in this world, and so grateful to you for sharing that with my audience today. Before you leave us today, I would just love for you to tell us, what is your definition of happiness?
I think my definition of happiness is understanding what compels you to feel safe so that you can feel successful. I think that equation, safety and success, is what equals luck. So the most simple version of happiness is the ability to buy Starbucks for the person behind me in line. It's a small act that will change, hopefully, their whole day and everybody else around them. And I think at a deep-rooted level for my own self, it's feeling safe so that I can do my greatest work.
So cool. Thank you so much, my friend.
You're so
welcome. And thank you to all of you for listening today and for being open to just seeing from a new perspective. We wish you a fabulous rest of the week. And remember, when you feel good, that's when you can do good. Bye-bye.